Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. First of all, if you are new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day. I don't have a schedule, but almost every single day kind of covers my schedule. So if you're looking for book reviews, if you like following what other people read, then feel free to stick around. I would love to have you here. Now let's talk about the book I am going to be reviewing today. Today I am going to be reviewing Stone by Stone, The Magnificent History in New England's Stone Walls by Robert M. Thorson. So I checked this book out of the library in advance of a trip I took to New England, or the New England Northeast region of the United States. This is not an area that I live in, and it's an area that I hadn't been to in about a decade. So I wanted to do some reading before I went to the area to see what I could learn about the area, and I just felt like I would have a better appreciation of the area if I read some books on it. So I just went to my library's website and I typed in New England and I wanted to see what would pop up. And this popped up. To be honest, when I placed a hold on this book, I wasn't sure how big it was going to be or what it was going to contain. I almost expected a collection of photography, like photographs of stone walls. That seemed to be the most logical conclusion. But when I got it and saw it was an about 250-page book of primarily text, not really photographs, I was a little concerned because I didn't realize there was 250 pages to discuss stone walls in general. I didn't know what we were going to be talking about for 250 pages, but I trusted that there had to be something because the author filled the pages, and I started to read. So initially having to change from this might be a photographic collection to this is going to be some sort of academic collection and what are we going to learn about stone walls was interesting. But once I got into it, I was pleasantly surprised. The author is a professor of geology, or at least was when this book was written, professor of geology and geophysics at the University of Connecticut, whose specialty is in the origin and nature of landforms. So these stone walls, and this is something I knew going to New England, they're kind of a cultural, I won't say icon. They are ubiquitous in New England. They're everywhere you look. And this was something I experienced when I was traveling in New England. Every road I took, every back road, when I was hiking in nature preserves, when I was going through national wildlife refuges, you would see just stone walls, most of the time in the middle of the woods. And I didn't really think anything of it. I knew they were kind of a feature of this area of the United States, but I hadn't put a lot of thought into this. Well, some people in the world have put a lot of thought into stone walls, and they write books on them, and the books are very educational. I do have to say that. The author really takes us back to the beginning, which I feel like is fitting for his degree or for his field of study, the origin and nature of landforms. He takes us all the way back to where New England came from, as in when the continents were splitting apart. Where did New England come from? What are the rocks that are there? What are the nature of the rocks that are there? How are they formed? Where do they come from? How do mountains form? He really takes us back to the very beginning. Where are even these rocks coming from? Why are there rocks here? He then talks about the process by which rocks are brought to the surface. So we kind of start with a geology background and a physics background to understand where these rocks are, how they came from, and what features they have, which I felt like was really interesting and not the way I expected the book to start. Now, if you're more focused on just wanting to learn about specifically them in New England, maybe skip the first couple chapters, but I actually found them the most interesting part of the book. I feel like when I was in New England, I saw all these mountains, all these rocks, but I could have told you they came from somewhere. They came from geological processes that happened millions of years ago in the earth, but I didn't really know anything beyond that, and having this book explain that to me and kind of where these natural features in New England came from was very, very helpful. He then goes on to discuss the historical period of colonial America. So when European settlers came and settled New England, they were here and they needed to build farms. So they built farms, and in the process of building farms, he goes through the physics that occurred in the freezing and the heaving of the land that brought all these big rocks to the surface. These big rocks being brought to the surface needed to go somewhere, and that's where we get these stone walls from. They really are essentially a refuse for non-biodegradable waste from a farm, the rocks that come up. I personally did not grow up on a farm and do not work on a farm, but my mother grew up on a farm and worked on a farm, and one spring task when getting the fields ready for whatever they were going to do in the fields was going behind the tractor or plow or whatever and having to pick up all the rocks that come to the surface. It's a task that has to be done, and the rocks have to go somewhere. It was just convenient that the colonists or the people who were working these fields had to bring the rocks to the outside of the field. The author takes a long time discussing kind of the economics and the farming practices that went into making these fields and why that's important for building these fences. He also talks about things like how high they are. They're the height they are, which is only about thigh high, because it's the easiest place to lift, or the height to lift rocks to when building a wall. That's the height that's easiest to lift to for an adult man. So it kind of, some of the features that we associate with stone walls aren't so much innate, or wasn't because someone thought, well, I'm going to build a wall that's this high. They just had a lot of rocks in their fields that they needed to build up, they needed to move out. And by moving out, they decided to just build up a rock wall. And he talks about the size of the fields actually corresponds to these walls, because at a certain point, if you have too big of a field, you have to walk all these rocks that are coming up in the surface and preventing you from being able to farm much further away to build the walls. And if you have too small of a plot of land, then it's not really an effective farm. So finding the sweet spot, which the author did by using computer modeling systems, but was something that these farmers had naturally figured out, was somewhere between 2 to 5 acres was the right size to not have to walk all your rocks out of the field too far, but also have an effective size crop and field for what you want to do. He then goes on to talk about kind of the abandonment after more suitable land opened up, per se, in the West. People moved out to the Midwest, to where the land didn't have all these rocks or all these problems. So basically, after this period of kind of fighting with the land for arability, growability, fighting with the land to farm, the colonists, or their descendants at this point, the people who we now call the Americans, are moving west as they find better or land that's easier to farm. When they move out, they abandon these fields, and these fields are left to return to their own natural state, which in a very short period of time means it returns to woodlands. So he goes through the process in which a field is kind of reclaimed, in which the wall kind of falls apart, but also talks about in letting these walls fall apart, they kind of acquire this romanticization, this view where we look back longingly on this time of stone walls, and that's how they've become kind of a cultural icon. First, you have to go through this period where they're very ubiquitous, they're almost not even mentioned because they're so common. Then you go through a period where they're kind of abandoned, no one thinks about them, no one's building them anymore when everyone moved west, and now we've moved into a period where we appreciate them as a cultural monument, as a testament to people who are no longer living but have left their indelible mark on New England, and kind of a way to remember the people who were farming those fields at that time. So he kind of goes through the whole history from quite literally the formation of the continent all the way through to the current state we have, where we have appreciation for these stone walls. I really enjoyed the flow throughout the entire book, and I really liked the way he moved from the very beginning all the way to the very end. And I liked the way that he made people like me, who don't really have a lot of personal interest, or I don't want to say personal interest, but I never thought I would be reading a book 250 pages on stone walls of New England. He made it somehow interesting to me and made me appreciate a little bit more about what I was seeing. I did have an experience walking through a national wildlife refuge. I forget if it was Ninigret, or I don't think it was Ninigret National Wildlife Refuge, but I don't remember. I think it also started with an N. I will put the National Wildlife Refuge in the description. That I actually did a hike through when I was on my trip, and it was an old farmland in Rhode Island along the coast that was turned over to, I guess, the National Wildlife Refuge Association group, and was left to go back to its natural state. And when walking through the woods, you quite literally do go through woodlands that have reclaimed areas that I assumed were previously being farmed, and you see the stone walls that used to border fields, stone walls of these rocks that were removed from the field when the field was being actively farmed, and now are being reclaimed by nature and the natural world, and will slowly, eventually over time, recede back into the soil, but for now kind of provides a testament linking the people who farmed this land many years in the past to me, a present person who has not farmed this land and is now visiting this area as a national wildlife refuge. And just seeing that connection is really cool. And I do have to say that this book was pleasantly surprising. Again, I had some not regrets, that sounds very strong. I don't have regrets. I had some reservations, that's the word I was looking for, going into this book, that it was going to be very academic and not really interesting, but the author did a really good job of making me care a lot about what I was seeing and give me the context I needed to appreciate these things that I was seeing in New England. If you're taking a trip to New England, if you live in New England or the Northeast section of the United States, and you want to know a little bit more about the stone walls you see everywhere, I do have to say this was quite an interesting book, very readable, and it read quite fast, stone by stone, by Robert M. Thorson. Give it a read, see what you think about it. If you have any thoughts or comments on this book, if you've read it, if you thought it was a great book, if you thought it was an awful book, if you thought my review was totally off base, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to get them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.